I can say for a fact that preparing videos is a lot more work than preparing audio. Sunday, May 8th, 2022. I'm Steven Searski. This here is my language vlog, episode number 3. And happy Mother's Day to all the ladies out there, the mothers, the grandmothers, the sisters, sisters-in-laws, and everybody who has had the chance to be a mother or a mother-like to someone. We appreciate it. We know you work hard. And yes, today, kind of a gloomy day I think it's raining again in Beijing. So not the exact, it's not like the sunny days that it was a couple days ago. It's also kind of cold, but I'm not sure if Mother's Day is as big of a deal here in China as it is overseas. Like in Canada, you see the advertisements and everything, but in China, you don't really see them so much. Anyway, today I was thinking about this week. I didn't get as much Chinese studies done as I wanted to, but I did do some cultural investigation, if you will. For those of you who have or who are studying Chinese, no doubt one of the things that will come across your studies at some point is how to write Chinese. And there are multiple ways to write Chinese. And one question I get whenever I go back to Canada is, how do you write Chinese into a cell phone or into the computer? One of my first memories of seeing Chinese is actually in a computer error when it used to spit out a whole bunch of Chinese characters that none of us knew what they were about. And we were kind of like, well, what is this? And they're like, that's Chinese, because that's where a lot of the computers were being manufactured back in the late 80s and early 90s. So I remember this and thinking, well, okay, but it seems so simple that Chinese was displayed on the screen, but how do you actually input it? Well, there's a few ways. So today I thought I'd talk a little bit about how not just I input Chinese into my cell phone or to other word processing programs, but also some of the characteristics of Chinese writing in general. So the very basics of Chinese writing, there is actually a method to the madness of all of their Chinese writing. There is actually a method to input or to write Chinese characters in general. And this is important because the way that most people input Chinese characters into their phone is not based on how the Chinese characters are written. Instead, they are based on how the Chinese characters sound. Now, I got this book a while ago, Writing Chinese Characters. This is one of the first books I bought when I was in China, when I first came to China, and it goes through quite a few different characters and writings, and it takes you through all of the basics of the character writings. And these ones, it's kind of cute to look back at what I had to look up back in the day, but it shows you how each character, not just each character, but this different strokes that are available to write. And so technically, if you wanted to associate this with the Latin alphabet or the Roman alphabet and writing, like English writing, this is your alphabet. Someone could tell you how to write a Chinese character without knowing the sound of the Chinese character based on the names of the strokes. Well, the names of the strokes aren't so easy. I mean, you kind of have to understand what they're meaning. So you have to know the strokes, of course. That seems simple enough. And then you come to a page like this, wherein there are some 50, 60 types of strokes that you can write. But knowing these strokes, someone could dictate to you how to write a character. That doesn't really help you very much if you have to learn 60 words just to understand how to actually write a character. But you'll see, like even on the basics, the very easy ones, dian, what is it? We got heng, which is across, shu is up and down. So and then pie, which is down to the left, na is to the right, dian is a dot, Zhe is a hook, and then we have go, which is a downward hook, and then T, which is a tick upwards. If you're learning spoken Chinese, none of this will matter to you. You're not going to ever really come across it. Well, you'll come across it, but you won't ever actually have to know it for any real reason other than if... No, I can't think of a reason why, if you are learning spoken Chinese, you'll ever have to learn how to write a Chinese character. That being said, there is a method to the madness. There's an order to how characters are actually written. And typically it's from top left to right and then down. And it usually starts on the left-hand side and goes to the right. Now that's the modern way. The traditional way is reverse. They actually... let me get this straight. Do they write it reverse or do they read it in reverse? They definitely read it in reverse, but the characters are still written left to right. So it's they start in the top left and they move around sort of clockwise, but traditional characters are usually read in reverse order or different ways. So I'm studying simplified Mandarin, which copies the Romanized version of left to right. So not just the characters, but then also reading other characters from on a page is from left to right. So that's the basics of how to write a Chinese character. Now, if you wanted to challenge yourself a little bit more with your Chinese and help learn the characters a little better, learning how to write a Chinese character or Chinese characters in general, and I'm not just talking like 1, 2, 3, 4, your 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm talking like learning how to write some of the bigger characters out there. You will start to understand a bit more of the culture, the culture that supports this language, that uses this language. Things like this, like me, and how sometimes there are... This is one of my very little example. So the top of me is written with the expectation, if you can see that, it's written with the expectation that there's going to be a line underneath. And this goes back to how Chinese was written back in the day. But if you look at how it's written, dot, dot, cross, down, and then stroke to the left, stroke to the right. Now, the expectation is that when you put the first 2 dots, that there's going to be something to support them, a line, and then the line goes through the middle, and you finish it. Might sound confusing. My point is that a lot of Chinese characters assume some sort of support. So when you're writing it, you write it as, like, if you finished writing it early, they'd be like, well, it's incomplete, and they'll know it's incomplete because typically after a couple dots, there's going to be something underneath. And then, it's how the culture thinks of creating a character, and you sort of see it perk up in the culture itself in society, where they expect some sort of collective support, if you will. Very small example. I know there are other examples where there are characters like do, the iron do, where it's you put 2 dots here, horizontal line, and then a vertical line. So do, that one again shows that there is some sort of, they're expecting, you won't just put 2 dots anywhere. 2 dots will always be over top of something else, over top of another line. I have found that when I have learned how to write Chinese characters, it has helped me learn characters in general. So to develop my memory of, of what the characters are, what they mean, not always their pronunciation, but what they mean. Because when you are writing a character from left to right and taking your time understanding how from top left to the right to the bottom, you encounter the radicals, you encounter each components, and each of those components has a meaning behind it and adds to the overall meaning of the more complex characters. I found it helped with some memorization, as like most or a lot of the Chinese characters have sort of built-in mnemonics already, so it's sort of built into the language itself. but you won't be aware of that mnemonic unless you sat down and actually learned how that character was actually composed. So what does this have to do with these other like Chinese input methods, like getting into putting into actual cell phones and computers? If you go to your settings, your keyboard settings in your I have a MacBook, and you choose the keyboard settings, you will see various different types. There's handwriting simplified, pinyin simplified, shuangpin simplified, stroke simplified, and then Wubi Xing. Now, Wubi Xing is the one that's sort of the more, it's famous, but not as ubiquitous as pinyin. Now, pinyin is what most of us use to enter Chinese characters into a cell phone or into a keyboard. Pinyin is the Romanized version or the Latinized spoken version of a Chinese character. It doesn't matter how you write the character. It matters on how the character sounds and the order of the letters involved in the spelling of or in that sound. That's what most people use. Other people, they will use either handwriting method, so they'll actually write on the screen the character that they're trying to input, or they will use the Wubi Xing, which is the type of keyboard, which was I think it was one of the first keyboard input methods for the Chinese language way back in it was 1963 that I think it was invented by this guy named Wang Yongmin. And Wang Yongmin, he's a professor. He's still alive. He wasn't in Beijing. He was in another city. But he worked for this government organization that was tasked with trying to input the Chinese characters into the computer. And there's a Radiolab podcast episode about this, the whole history of the Wubi Xing keyboard input method. It's fantastic. It's a neat little listen that goes through probably more in depth than I could possibly do in this short time of how Chinese characters are input into the keyboard. Since I use Pinyin, that's mostly what I do, and it's easier because for me it uses your traditional keyboard. It's a typical QWERTY keyboard, doesn't change. The Chinese version doesn't change at all. They use the same one. All of the letters are pronounced, I can't say they're pronounced the same. Of course, there are differences with Chinese pronunciation and English pronunciation, but a Q is a Q, so qi, like QI, although it's pronounced qi, like for air, Q is Q. So you know how in Chinese the letter Q is pronounced ch, then you know the Q is a Q. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, explaining in a little bit more detail than is probably necessary for people who are familiar with Chinese. But if you come across them, if you're just beginning Chinese, those tricky letters, Q, the S or the SH sound, Z or ZH or ZI and ZE, Z and Z or S and S, S and S, Z, J or J, ZHI, ZHE. There are some differences in the pronunciation, but you can usually figure it out because if you are typing in Pinyin on the keyboard will actually give you an option of which character you actually mean. So Jiga or J, Jiga is like this, so Z-H-I-G-E. 2 words, means this thing. J, like there, Z-H-E. I know. Very different, very subtle pronunciation differences in pronunciation, but if you knew how to spell it, if you knew which word you meant, as you're typing on the keyboard, it will pop up on the screen. It'll give you 3 or 4 different options, and then you press the number key that's associated with that character. I find that horribly cumbersome. It's confusing for me. I don't like typing Chinese very much on a keyboard, on an actual keyboard, but on a cell phone, it's a lot easier like that. So I go in there, I press Pinyin T26, and it's the same thing. What I just said, J, Z-H-I, I got that wrong, Z-H-E-G-E, Zhiga, this. I actually got that wrong, I apologize. Z-H-I-G-E, this thing, you enter that in, or Z-H-E, like there, or J, like that. It gives you a bunch of options that you can then choose. All right, after some consultation, my point with all of this is that if you don't know, so I have Z-H-I, J, 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 does it? If you don't recognize any of those characters right there, you can press this little arrow here and it gives you more choices, just in case you want to know even more characters that you're probably never going to use. But those three letters together, Z-H-I, can give you numerous possibilities for which character you're actually using. This is where Pinyin can fail you, but the Wubi Xing keyboard can actually help you, because the Wubi Xing or the Wubi keyboard input method is based on stroke order rather than on sound. So that is the downside of Pinyin, but it's the easiest one to use. And this is pretty much what all foreigners are using to input Chinese into their phones, like if it's WeChat, Weibo, or whatever. And then a lot of Chinese people also use the Pinyin input, especially like most people would, because that's what they're taught very early in their school years. So a lot of Chinese kids will start learning Pinyin before they actually start writing the Chinese characters themselves. That might sound odd, but one of the reasons for this, it has to deal with the standardization of the Mandarin Chinese language, in that Pinyin promotes the idea of pronouncing any and every character or any and every Chinese word in a standardized way, which is what the authorities, the educators want here in Chinese. So when I'm saying I'm studying simplified Mandarin Chinese, that is based on these textbooks that is produced with the idea of standardizing the language in total. So I'm on HSK 5, Hanyu Shuiping Kaoshi. So it's the HSK test, Chinese language proficiency test. These are your standardly pronounced, standardly written Chinese simplified characters. Simplified is different from traditional, as most people will attest to, but the pronunciation of the characters in this standard course is all the same, regardless of whether you're in Harbin, Beijing, Shanghai, Xinjiang, or Guangdong. It's the standard Mandarin is your standard issue Chinese language, and that's why they prefer to use Pinyin, and that they teach the kids Pinyin is because it teaches that standard pronunciation. Now, let's try this Wubi method, which I've never actually done before, and I'm still learning it, so you'll see there's a few different ways that I can input. We have Pinyin T9, which is like the old telephone method, where you press and hold the character and you can choose which letter you want. And I have not found that very useful for Chinese input at all. Pinyin T26 is what I normally use. Writing, so that's where you actually can write in the character yourself, which is very helpful, especially if you are learning, if you need to enter it into a dictionary using an electronic dictionary. Voice, it doesn't always recognize what I'm saying because my Chinese pronunciation is terrible. Wubi T9, Wubi T6, these are the ones that I just mentioned, where these were one of the original methods of inputting the Chinese characters into modern computers, or into computers when they first started being produced back in the 1960s or so. Bihua is, this one's neat, and I'd actually like to learn how to use this one, because this one is the 5-stroke keyboard, in which apparently you can enter any and every character according to its stroke order. I can't say that I'm very good at this. Even though I've been practicing how to write Chinese characters for a while, I don't understand what they're doing. For example, Guang or Chang. I will set it for Guang or Chang, which are very similar letters, very similar characters. If I go top, Hung, and then PR. Oh, look at that! I got Guang. Yay! I got it. First attempt. Okay, so that is what I was trying to do. So I got Na, Hung, and PR. That gives me Guang. What about Chang? Let's try to do Chang. So that would be PR and Hung. 没有，为什么? I don't know. But it should show up somewhere. It should show up somewhere, and it's not. So in a situation like this where I don't know what's going on, I go nope, going to my writing, and I'll just write it in, and that's the character I wanted, right? Ubihua, or sorry, not Ubihua, Wubi T26. So this is the one that was very famously invented by one of these computer guys, and this is, I've been reading about this today, or this past week, in an effort to sort of understand a little bit more of how the Chinese characters are input, and to avoid studying Chinese grammar, to tell you the truth. So in a bigger example, here's your typical keyboard. Now, you could call this QWERTY. I guess it could be Pinyin, or this could be Wubi Xing. Now, with Wubi Xing, there is a specific way that these keys are lined up, or that they're utilized in inputting the Chinese language. It's actually kind of neat how he came up with this, or how they came up with this. I'll leave it to you to go to the Radiolab episode to learn more about the history of it. Basically, it took them like 5 years, and they wrote out all the characters and grouped them, and they refined them over a 5-year period, and they came up with about 125 groups of Chinese characters that had similar properties. And by similar properties, I mean like the radicals were the same, the components were laid out similarly, or they had some sort of one of the characters, like one of the components of the overall character were similar, and so they could be grouped together in a manner. Starting, where do you think you would start if you were creating a input method for the Chinese language? You might say, oh, you'd start at the top, right? No, that's not how you learn it. Chinese kids learn how to write the Chinese language usually with the first character, yi or hung. Then they learn the downward stroke. Then they learn downwards to the left, then na, and then they learn the hook. Now the hook is, I don't know why they call it the hook. There's probably a reason for it. Ooh, let me check my book. I'm sure I won't get a reason for it in my book, but they might actually give me the real name for it. Hook. Go, not go. I want the other one. Well, would it be ja or would it be go? One of those two. I'm not sure. Good question. And I don't see the other one that they used. Hung zhi wan go. Maybe that's one they used quite a bit. I'm not seeing it. Not seeing it at all. No problem. Right. Anyway, bottom portion is hook. So again, you have hung, then you have the downward stroke, and then you have the downwards to the left, which is the quirt, and then Y to P is your na, and then these last ones here are the hook. They're also not actually, you don't read them this way, left to right. You actually have to read them from right to left. The 5 characters that I just gave you were called are all the different zones or the different regions of the input method. So in the middle, you have zone 1, you have zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, and then zone 5. Now, to complicate things, zone 1 and zone 2 actually goes down to the letter M on the bottom line of the keyboard. I don't know why, because I guess it gives it 5 characters or 5 letters within that grouping. So 5 characters there, 5 letters here, 5 there, and then 5 on the bottom as well. The idea being, so why is it 5? The idea being is that with this Wubi Xing method of inputting the Chinese characters, you would get a bit of information. So the first number would be the region, and then you get the letter key. So what number of letter key would you have to press next? So region 1, if you had 1, 2, it would be region 1, keystroke 2. So, but you're reading from G to A. So region 1 and keystroke 2 would be F. So you press that first, and that would give you your character. Let's see what happens. I'm not very good at this. So we're going to press Wubi T26. So 1, 2 would be F. D. How do you spell D? Why is it that? I don't know. That's what comes up right there. D is the character that pops up. There is a poem that goes along with this, and if you look on your keyboard settings in your computers, PC or Mac, you will see the poem that they have written to help people memorize the regions. Now, yes, did I just completely neglect to finish off that example? I did, because I had no idea where to go with it. Okay, so region 1, 2 is F, gotcha. Okay, what region 3, 1 would be up on the top level here. 3, 1, 1, 2, region 3, sorry, 1, 2, 3, and 3, 1 would be T, and that gives me H. I'll get back to that in a moment. When you read, or when you see on your MacBook or your PC the poem, there's actually 3 versions of it now. I think they're using the newest one. Let me double check. Good question. Show keyboard preferences. Wubi Xing Jin Ren Yue Bai Wei Yan Wei Shui Huo Zhe. That would be not New Century version. That would be, I don't know. That doesn't show up. That's odd. Well, I'll leave it to you guys to figure out which one they're using. Anyway, that's there's a little bit of a poem that they use to identify the layout of the keyboard, and by memorizing that layout will help you or help typists figure out which zone that they're going to actually use. 2 more things about this Wubi Xing keyboard that I thought were actually kind of neat. Number 1, the Z character, the Z letter, is actually a wildcard. So if you don't know how to spell the word, or how to write the word, sorry, if you don't know how to write the word according to the regions as they're laid out, then you can press the Z character, and it will give you all of the possible, or at least a few selections of what is possible with the next stroke in that character. So if you know hung, like the straight across line, but you don't know the next one, you press Z, and it'll give you an option of what to choose next. Likewise, if you know the downward stroke, but you don't know what it is, or maybe if you know na, like you know there's 2 nas, 2 dots, and you don't know what the third stroke would be, you press the Z character, and it'll give you combinations of characters with 2 dots and what could be next after that. The other thing with this Wubi Xing input method is these characters, these letters, so it gives you 1 Chinese character and then a couple English letters. And what that is doing is telling you which other English letters you could press on the keyboard to get that specified character. Does this sound confusing to you? It is, because in order to get Wubi Xing proper and actually up to speed, you have to spend some time learning it. All of which means that if you're already learning Mandarin, if you're learning Chinese, and you're learning how to speak Chinese and to read Chinese and to write Chinese, there are 4 different methods that you have to learn in order to learn the language. Enjoy it! It's an intensive language and it does take a lot of time. I'm not going to lie about that. Do you need to know Wubi? No, you don't. Pinyin is what a lot of people use. It's more than enough for most people's efforts and for their goals or their desires. If you want to get into it, I wonder if it might be better for maybe some people could, if they were actually interested in how to write Chinese characters and how to form them overall, then the Wubi method would be a good way to sort of help you remind yourself. But you have, to me, it seems a bit convoluted because you're mixing the English letters with the Chinese stroke order of the character, which seems horribly complicated in my mind, but that's because as a English speaker, I'm used to looking at this keyboard going, that's all English letters. Mixing it can be a little bit difficult when instead of seeing it as a pinyin or pronunciation component, now I have to look at the characters as a region of a Chinese character stroke order. Maybe in time. The one other keyboard that I thought was neat in the input methods was the bihua. So bihua is according to the 5 basic strokes of the Chinese language. And you'll see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this one was actually developed on the numeric keypads on computers many, many years ago. Like back when they first started making keyboards for personal computer use sort of thing, they came up with this method that you could do it all with one hand and that you could type it a lot faster rather than looking at an English keyboard and getting confused. Wait a minute, which region? Which English letter is which region again? Enter bihua. Bihua is similar to having a pen stroke in your hand, like a calligraphy pen in your hand, or a paintbrush, and being able to draw the strokes with just one hand. Now, I did get it before, I think. Again with Guang. Nothing. Didn't get that. Nah. Nope. Oh no. Oh, I lost it. Well, that's about as much as I can do. This one sounds interesting, looks interesting. I wouldn't mind learning more about this, and I was thinking, I would take the HSK5 test on computer if only I could use the Wubi or bihua input methods. Wouldn't that be a... Sorry, what, foreigner? You want to do what? Why don't you just use the same keyboard that everybody else is using? No. I must be more authentic in my approach to learning the Chinese language, especially during an important test that sort of gauges my proficiency. Steve, why did you fail the Chinese test? Well, because I used the Wubi method that I didn't know how to use yet. Snap. And so with that, those are the different methods of writing, inputting the Chinese characters into the phone. So you have your pinyin. Pinyin T9, again, is like your old school phone input method. Pinyin T6 is like your regular QWERTY keyboard. Then you have your writing method. So this is the one that I probably use quite a bit as well when I'm using a dictionary. Then you have voice, which is what a lot of people would use, especially you see a lot of older people actually using voice input quite a bit. Not too many people use it, like younger people when they're not talking to people. They're usually texting or emojiing. Wubi T9 is that region input method, but in that phone layout again. T26, Wubi T26, same QWERTY keyboard, but laid out in the 5 regions that Wubi requires or likes. Bihua, 5 basic strokes, all on 5 numbers that you can input just about any character very quickly with one hand. English T9, English T26, and then others. So out of all of those writing methods, I use pinyin and I use handwriting. Why do I use handwriting? Is because when I am using something like TREWQ, like this, it's a lot easier to, especially nowadays, to look at a character and go, okay, I don't know what that one is. I know that one's Wang, but I don't know what this one is with a little dot in the bottom. That's Yu. Yu means jade. And this one even gives me a pronunciation for it as well. So that's when I start using Chinese characters, when I don't know what the character is. The whole reason I got into learning how to write, and I figured this out many, many years ago when I bought this, was that in trying to learn how to actually use or how to read Chinese, I realized that I wouldn't be able to simply look up a character in a textbook or in a dictionary. I couldn't do it because I didn't know how to use a dictionary. It's all in characters. I don't know the pronunciation. Well, there are two methods. Again, it does go on Pinyin order, so there are some dictionaries that you can get that are ordered in that fashion. Most Chinese dictionaries are actually ordered in the stroke order, so the number of strokes that are in each character would determine where it's placed in the dictionary itself. Chinese dictionary, Oxford Chinese Dictionary Pocket. This is the pocket version, right? I mean, whose pocket? How big is that you can have pockets that big, right? This one, English to Chinese now. This one is set up in the Pinyin fashion, but the issue with this, even with it being Pinyin, is that with Chinese characters, when you are reading the newspaper and you come across, when you're reading a newspaper, not come across a character you don't know, when you're reading the newspaper and reading the characters, it's assumed that you know what they sound like, which then would give you where to look it up in the Pinyin pronunciation method. But if you don't know how it's pronounced, you can't look it up. And how do you find out a character that you don't know what it is and you don't know the pronunciation? Well, you ask somebody. What does this mean? 这是什么意思? 这个汉字什么意思? Or if you don't want to talk to people, because people will then go, huh? 什么意思? 我听不懂. They'll say, they don't understand what you're saying anyway. You learn how to write. And that's why I started learning how to write Chinese, is because I want to be able to, on my own, look up characters, not just in the newspaper, but in books and on websites and everything else, and be sort of self-sufficient in my Chinese studies. I use TREWQ because TREWQ doesn't rush you through the input method for that. I'll give you an example. So here I have one line, and I go, okay, I don't know what the next line is. Down, okay, and then you see how it's not erasing anything just yet. And then finally gives me all of these options of what the character could be at the bottom, right? I can choose any one of those. However, if I use the writing input method here, so I go to writing input method there, and I do this, it disappears. Quick, I can't remember. Okay, we'll go T. This one, it could be Gan, it could be anything. Don't know. Okay, this one, finally. Wang. It's a bit quicker. It has to happen a lot faster, simply because I guess it's built for Chinese people, not for foreigners learning Chinese. That's why TREWQ is very helpful in its ability. And this video is not sponsored by them at all. It's just a very useful and good tool to use. But TREWQ is an electronic dictionary. Although you can go into it, and it does give you some of the how characters are written, the stroke order, I'll give you that. That's also very helpful. Characters involved in it as well, so that's helpful if it's a more complex character as well. But overall, very useful app that I've found very good for looking up characters along the way and practicing my own Chinese writing and looking up things in the dictionary. Now, of all that, I still do practice some of my own writing, usually in my own book. 1 second, I've shown this before. Oops. So this is what I normally have. Typical, just a plain old notebook. And you'll see this is what I've done before. So this is free form Chinese writing by yours truly. To get to that level, you do actually have to understand how the characters are formulated, which is why this book was very helpful in that, because it shows you how the characters are laid out in each character is laid out. But then they also have these books where they're meant for Chinese students that are studying penmanship at school, and these books actually come with 2 sheets in each. So you'll see here, that's the characters you're supposed to learn, but it has onion paper over top of it, so you can trace it. And that's what they're trying to do. So you can read about the character, how it's composed, and then you write it out several times. With this type of paper, or with this type of, I'm guessing they would use pen. I think they would use a pen like this. Right? And I just bought this actually. It was 16 kwai, $3 Canadian, which I figured I'd start writing more by hand, like properly, rather than with an ink pen that I normally use. I normally just use like one of these pens instead, but these ones, like the calligraphy pens, are a little bit more fancy, and these are some of the ones that they would use in Chinese penmanship classes, but you don't need to if you don't have to, if you don't want. Each of these blocks cut up into 4 little squares, very helpful, because it forces you to look at the character and to carefully place the character in each of its respective areas, following the specific stroke order that is necessary to draw out a character. That stroke order is important. It's not just made up. It's actually important, even when you go to TREWQ, because TREWQ will start guessing what character you mean as you start inputting the different strokes. Same with the Baidu Translate, or most of the input methods that use, like for native speakers, they all start predicting what you're going to input based on which stroke you have put down next. So it isn't just a free-for-all in terms of, just write the character. And I've been told some of my characters are terrible. That's not how you write that character. And I'm like, yeah, I don't see you writing. It is actually a thing to address, that if you're going to learn how to write Chinese, then there is a stroke order to follow, and books like this can help you in getting through that. They do sell little books like this, but as I found out, this is not the one I wanted. This is a Pinyin book. And how do you know it's Pinyin? Well, it's not quadrants. It's dihedrants. It's two blocks. It's cut up in 3 horizontal lines instead of blocks of 4, which is what I was looking for. Like, I got it anyway because I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter. It has a box. It has 3 lines. I can figure out where the imaginary quarters can be. I can draw lines through them. So I just picked it up anyway. But the 2 lines or the 3 lines, this type of ruled paper, that belongs into Pinyin studies. Whereas the one with the blocks of 4 in this book, that is meant for practicing the actual Chinese characters themselves. So there you have it. That is all about Chinese writing input methods. Again, I primarily use Pinyin and actual handwriting with my finger, like index finger or my middle finger, in an effort to, I write in the characters when using a dictionary, but if I'm typing to somebody, I'll be using Pinyin, as it's a lot faster and a lot easier to use than any other input method. The Wubi Xing method would be used for typists, basically, if they have to use a keyboard like this. But most of the elder Chinese people, as far as I know, either handwrite into the phone or they send a voice message. Have you eaten yet? Ma? Yes, Mom, I've eaten. No, I haven't eaten. Send food, please. Why am I? I think that's what they would say, actually. So of all this, I mean, more books, more books, more books, right? Of all these things, that's what it takes to try to learn the Chinese language. Oh, and goodness, and every time I speak, people still don't understand what I'm saying. I'll get there, and this is all in preparation for the HSK5 test, and actually, I'm not even sure if it's going to happen next month because they are postponing the tests due to the current outbreak here in Beijing. I'm not sure when it'll exactly happen. I'm not in a rush. I do feel as if I could spend a little bit more time reviewing some of the grammar points and some of the characters. And reading the textbook itself has gotten easier, but reading the practice tests has not gotten easier. So I have an issue that I have to address, and that issue is that I don't know what I'm doing. So basically having a couple more weeks will enable me to hopefully improve my reading comprehension and my listening comprehension as well. I have been informed that I think there is this month where there is an online Chinese test at home. I don't know if they're going to do this again, like if this is a common thing, a repeating thing, or if it's just a one-off for the postponement of tests this month because the cancellations, like the blockages in the city, happened rather soon, rather suddenly. So whether or not they're going to do that going forward, not sure. Should be interesting. If they do, then it just means I can get it done on my own time at my own place, and a whole lot easier and faster than going to one of the centers out in the embassy district here in Beijing. So there you go. So Pinyin, Wubi, Bihua, the different writing methods, the Chinese input writing methods, Chinese writing input methods that you can have fun with on your keyboards. Now you can say that you can impress your friends with all your Chinese input methods. Well, they actually write it in by their fingers, or there's actually a layout to the keyboard that they have to memorize, and they do have to memorize, with the stroke order of the Chinese characters. It's true. And it's a little bit complicated, so I'm not going to pretend to know everything about it. Again, there was that Radio Lab podcast available that goes into the history of the Wubi keyboard or method creation and the history of it quite a bit. It's very interesting to have a listen to. And that will do it for today, I think. I hope you guys enjoyed that. That was kind of fun to go through. It was a learning experience for me this week, and also helped me not stress out too much about not learning Chinese, because in a manner I was learning about Chinese. I just wasn't doing what I needed to do to pass the test, right? Like, I don't need to know how to write Chinese. I don't need to know how to write. I don't need to know how to input Chinese characters into a keyboard to pass the test. Not necessary. I'm going to use Pinyin, or what I want to use, I actually want to use the pencil. I want to write the characters. I want to use the pencil-based test whenever I do finally get around to doing the HSK5 test. So there you guys go. If I can, I'll put the show notes up on my website, stevensersky.com. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. Talk again. Bye-bye.